In the steel and glass canyons of New York City, one name was spoken only in hushed, fearful tones: Alistair Blackwood. He was a king of finance, a titan of industry whose empire was as vast as his temper was legendary. Men with decades of experience would tremble before his icy gaze. The media called him the Blackwood Beast. For years, everyone understood the cardinal rule: you do not provoke Alistair Blackwood. You bow, you obey, and you pray you go unnoticed. But they never accounted for Lara Vance, a 24-year-old waitress with worn-out shoes, mountains of debt, and a spine made of unbendable steel. This is the story of the night she decided she'd had enough, and in doing so, lit a match in a world soaked in gasoline. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant, it was a cathedral of modern cuisine, a place where power was the main course and money was the wine. Perched 60 floors above Manhattan, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city lights. The clinking of crystal silverware against Bernardo porcelain was the restaurant's gentle heartbeat. The staff moved with the silent, practiced grace of ballet dancers. Fear, however, had its own sound, a deadening silence that fell over the room the moment Alistair Blackwood entered. He didn't walk. He conquered space. Tall, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, the color of midnight, his presence sucked the warmth from the air. His hair was streaked with distinguished silver at the temples, but his face was sharp, predatory, and his pale grey eyes missed nothing. They were the eyes of a hawk that had never known a moment of doubt. Behind him trailed his ever-present lawyer and confidant, Julian Croft, a man who looked permanently apologetic for the storm his boss was about to unleash. Lara Vance watched the performance from her station near the kitchen. She had worked at Aurelia for 2 years, using every dollar to pay down the crushing medical debt her parents had accrued. She was an artist at heart. Her hands, which were meant to hold charcoal and paintbrushes, had grown calloused from carrying heavy trays. She'd seen powerful people come and go, senators, celebrities, tech moguls. Most were demanding. Some were arrogant, but Blackwood was different. He radiated a kind of pure, unadulterated rage that seemed to be his natural state of being. Tonight was a special occasion for him, though no one would guess it from his demeanor. It was the 5th anniversary of his acquisition of a rival tech firm, a ruthless corporate slaughter that had cemented his legendary status. His table, the best in the house, was waiting. Lara's manager, the perpetually sweating Monsieur Dubois, scurried over to her. "Vance!" He hissed, his voice tight with anxiety. "You have table 7, Mr. Blackwood's table." A cold knot formed in Lara's stomach. It was a rite of passage for the senior staff, and a terrifying one. She'd managed to avoid it until now. "Of course, Monsieur Dubois." "No mistakes," he whispered, gripping her arm. "The steak, a porterhouse Chicago-style char, rare. Exactly rare. Not medium rare. Not blue. If the chef gets it wrong, you send it back before it ever touches his table. Understand, Hasnia?" "Understood." For the first hour, things were deceptively calm. Alistair spoke in low, clipped tones to Julian, dissecting a business deal with surgical precision. Lara served their drinks, her movements economical and quiet. She didn't smile obsequiously like the others. She was professional, present, and invisible. Alistair never once looked at her. To him, she was just a pair of hands. Then came the main course. Lara carried the large platter to the table, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She had checked the steak herself in the kitchen. The chef, a Michelin-starred artist named Jean-Pierre, had assured her it was perfect. She placed the plate before Alistair Blackwood. He didn't look at it immediately, finishing a sentence that ended with the word "liquidate." Then his gaze dropped. He picked up his knife, sliced into the center of the thick-cut meat, and pushed the two halves apart. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The center of the steak was a warm, vibrant red. It was a textbook definition of rare. But Alistair's face, which had been a mask of cold indifference, began to contort into something thunderous. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. Julian Croft flinched. Monsieur Dubois, hovering nearby, turned pale. Lara kept her composure. "Your porterhouse, sir. Chicago-style rare." He looked up at her then, and for the first time, she felt the full, terrifying force of his attention. It was like being pinned by a searchlight. "Are you blind or are you incompetent?" He snarled the words, cutting through the restaurant's hushed ambiance. Heads began to turn. "This is medium rare. It's bleeding pink, not red. I ordered rare. Is that a difficult concept for you and the cretin you have in the kitchen to understand?" Lara looked at the steak. He was wrong. It was a perfect rare. But arguing with Alistair Blackwood was professional suicide. The script was simple: apologize, profusely take the plate, and beg the kitchen to perform a miracle. Monsieur Dubois started to rush forward, his hands flapping uselessly. "Mr. Blackwood, my deepest apologies. 1,000 pardons. I will have it replaced immediately." But Lara didn't move. Something inside her, a long, dormant coil of frustration and weariness, snapped. She was tired. Tired of the debt. Tired of the condescension. Tired of being treated like a piece of furniture by men who thought their wealth gave them the right to be cruel. She'd spent the morning on the phone with an insurance company, begging them not to drop her father's coverage. This billionaire's tantrum over a perfectly cooked piece of meat felt like a cosmic insult. She met his furious gaze. Her voice when she spoke was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it carried across the suddenly silent dining room. "No, sir," she said. The word hung in the air, stunning everyone into silence. Alistair Blackwood looked as if she had physically slapped him. Even Julian Croft's jaw went slack. "What?" Alistair breathed. "Did you just say to me?" "I said no." Lara repeated, her chin lifting slightly. "I will not be taking the steak back, because there is nothing wrong with it. It is cooked exactly as you requested. It is rare." The audacity of it was breathtaking. A waitress was not just disagreeing with him. She was correcting him. Publicly. Alistair's knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. A dark, dangerous color was rising in his cheeks. "You are telling me," he said, each word a block of ice, "that I don't know how I like my own steak." "I'm telling you," Lara replied, her voice unwavering, "that what you see on your plate is the culinary definition of rare. Perhaps what you want is something different. Perhaps you want it blue or seared for 10 seconds and served cold. But you ordered rare. And this is what the entire culinary world and this kitchen understands rare to be." She took a small breath, the point of no return, long since past. "So the error, sir, isn't on the plate. It's in the order." For a full 10 seconds, the world seemed to stop. You could hear a pin drop. Alistair Blackwood stared at her, his expression unreadable. It was a terrifying blankness, the calm at the center of a hurricane. Everyone braced for the explosion, for the shouting, the firing, the utter annihilation of this foolish, brave girl. He slowly placed his knife and fork down the silver, making a soft, final clink against the porcelain. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood to his full height, looming over her. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He did something far worse. He looked past her, his gaze falling on the horrified Monsieur Dubois. "Get her out of my sight," Alistair Blackwood said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. and send me her final paycheck. She's finished." He then threw his napkin onto the table, turned without another word, and strode out of the restaurant, Julian Croft scrambling to follow in his wake. The silence Alistair left behind was heavier than his presence had been. Every eye in Aurelia was on Lara. Some held pity, most held a kind of morbid curiosity. Monsieur Dubois looked like he was about to have a heart attack. His face was a mottled mess of red and white. "Out!" he finally choked out, pointing a trembling finger toward the staff exit. "Now, clean out your locker. You are a ghost. You were never here." Lara didn't argue. She didn't plead. A strange sense of calm had washed over her. It was the serene feeling of someone who has already hit rock bottom and is no longer afraid of the fall. She walked to the back, her head held high, ignoring the whispers and stares of her colleagues. As she changed out of her uniform and into her street clothes, jeans, and a worn-out sweater, she expected to feel regret or fear. Instead, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. The next 24 hours were a blur of anxiety. The pride faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of her situation. She was jobless. The medical bills were a mountain, and she had just been fired in the most spectacular way possible from one of the highest-paying service jobs in the city. She spent the day sending out resumes to dozens of restaurants, knowing the story of the waitress who stood up to the Blackwood beast would likely spread through the industry like wildfire. She was probably blacklisted. The next afternoon, a knock came at the door of her tiny fifth-floor walk-up apartment in Queens. She opened it to find a man in a crisp suit holding a sleek leather portfolio. He wasn't a process server. He looked too expensive for that. "Miss Lara Vance?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yes. My name is Arthur Covington. I represent Blackwood Industries." Ilara's blood ran cold. Was she being sued for what emotional distress over a steak? "I've been sent to deliver this," he said, handing her the portfolio. She took it hesitantly and opened it. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a non-disclosure agreement, dense with legal jargon, that essentially forbade her from ever speaking about Alistair Blackwood, the incident at Aurelia, or anything related to him for the rest of her life. The second document was a cashier's check. She stared at the number, her mind refusing to process it. It was for $250,000. $250,000. It was more money than she had ever seen. It would wipe out her parents' debt completely. It would let her go back to art school. It was freedom printed on a single piece of paper. All she had to do was sign the other piece of paper and promise to be silent forever. Her hands trembled as she held the check. This was the way of men like Alistair Blackwood. They didn't just fire you, they erased you. They bought your silence, paid to have the inconvenience of your existence expunged from their narrative. He wasn't just firing her. He was trying to buy her integrity, to put a price on the moment she stood up to him, reducing it to a simple, dirty transaction. The man, Arthur Covington, waited patiently. "You'll find the terms are quite generous," he said, as if discussing a weather report. "Sign the NDA, the check is yours to cash immediately." Lara looked from the check to the NDA, then back to the man's impassive face. She thought about her father's upcoming surgery, her mother's tired eyes. This money was a lifeline. It was the sensible thing to do. The only thing to do. She walked over to her small kitchen counter, picked up a pen and clicked it. The lawyer allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Then Lara did something that made no sense. She took the check and with a steady hand, she tore it in half. Then she tore it into quarters. She handed the small, useless pieces of paper back to the stunned lawyer. "Please tell Mr. Blackwood." she said, her voice clear and firm, "that my silence is not for sale." She then took the NDA, ripped that in half as well, and placed the pieces on top of the ruined check in his hands. "Have a good day," she said, and gently closed the door in his bewildered face. Leaning against the door, her heart hammered against her ribs. She had just torn up a fortune. She had just committed an act of financial insanity. But as the shock wore off, that same feeling from the restaurant returned stronger this time. It was the feeling of owning the one thing Alistair Blackwood couldn't buy herself. Meanwhile, in a penthouse apartment that looked more like an art museum than a home, Alistair Blackwood stared out at the city. Julian Croft stood beside him, holding a phone to his ear. "Yes, Mr. Covington, I understand," Julian said, his eyes wide with disbelief. She tore it up, both documents. "Yes, I'll inform him." Julian hung up and turned to his boss. "You're not going to believe this." "Try me," Alistair said without turning around. "She refused the money. The waitress, Lara Vance. She tore up the check." Alistair was silent for a long moment. He slowly turned from the window, and for the first time in a very long time, his face held an expression other than anger or indifference. It was one of pure, unadulterated shock. Everyone had a price. That was the central, unshakable axiom of his life. Politicians, rivals, employees, even family. Everyone could be bought. It was just a matter of finding the correct number. A waitress with, according to his background check, over $200,000 in familial medical debt should have signed that NDA so fast the ink would have smeared. But she hadn't. She had looked at a life-changing sum of money and chosen what pride spite. It was illogical. It was infuriating. And it was, to his complete and utter astonishment, intriguing. For 2 years since the incident, no, the accident, Alistair had lived in a cocoon of controlled rage. He kept everyone at a distance with his temper, a weapon that ensured no one got close enough to see the cracks in his armor. He trusted no one, because the one person he had trusted with his life, the driver of his car that fateful night, had betrayed that trust. Everyone in his orbit was a sycophant or an enemy, all of them predictable. This girl was not predictable. "Get her," Alistair said, his voice quiet. "Get her?" Julian asked, confused. "You mean have security escort her from the city? Put more pressure on her?" "No," Alistair said, turning back to the window. A strange, almost predatory smile touched his lips. "I mean get her. Bring her here, to my office. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." Julian stared at his boss's reflection in the glass. "May I ask why?" Alistair Blackwood watched a helicopter slice through the sky below. "I want to see what someone who can't be bought looks like up close. And then," he added, his voice hardening, "I'm going to find out what it is she really wants." The Blackwood Industries building was a shard of obsidian thrusting into the sky, a monument to ruthless ambition. Walking into the lobby felt like entering a different realm, one of hushed tones, polished marble, and the palpable weight of money. Lara, dressed in the nicest and only blouse she owned, felt entirely out of place. The summons had come via a terse phone call from Julian Croft, which had sounded less like an invitation and more like a command. She was escorted to the top floor by a silent security guard. The elevator opened directly into a vast minimalist office. One wall was a seamless window offering a panoramic view of the city. The other walls were adorned with severe abstract art, and behind a desk the size of a small car sat Alistair Blackwood. He didn't rise. He simply watched her approach, his grey eyes tracking her every move. The silence was a weapon designed to intimidate, to make her feel small and insignificant. But Lara had faced down her own terror, tearing up that check. This was just the aftermath. She stopped a few feet from his desk and waited. "Miss Vance?" He finally said, his voice a smooth, cold baritone. "Thank you for coming." It wasn't a pleasantry, it was a statement of fact. "I wasn't aware I had a choice," she replied, her voice steady. A flicker of something amusement respect passed through his eyes. "There is always a choice. You more than anyone seem to understand that. You chose to publicly humiliate me in my favorite restaurant. You chose to tear up $250,000. These are unusual choices. The first was a choice to maintain my professional integrity," Lara corrected him. "The second was a choice to maintain my personal integrity. They're not that unusual if you value those things." Alistair leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Integrity, a lovely concept. But it doesn't pay for a parent's cancer treatment, does it? It doesn't keep a roof over your head after you've been, as I made sure of, blacklisted from every reputable restaurant in this city." The threat was veiled but clear. He hadn't just gotten her fired, he had salted the earth behind her. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwood?" Lara asked, cutting to the chase. "I want to understand you," he said, and it sounded like the most honest thing he'd said so far. "In my world, people operate on a predictable set of inputs, greed and fear. You seem to be immune to both. This makes you either a fool or a very dangerous kind of person. I need to know which." He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I have a problem, Miss Vance. My company is surrounded by yes men. People paid to agree with me, to anticipate my desires, to tell me my steak is medium rare, even when it's still mooing. They are liars, sycophants. They are utterly, completely useless to me in any real sense." He turned back to face her. "You are not a sycophant. You are, from what I have gathered in the last 48 hours, pathologically honest. You are not afraid of me, and you cannot be bought with what I considered to be a generous sum." He walked slowly back toward her, circling her like a shark. "This makes you a unique commodity." Lara's heart began to beat faster. She had no idea where this was going. "I am prepared to make you an offer," he said, stopping directly in front of her. "A new one, not a payoff, a job." She stared at him, speechless. "I want you to work for me," he continued. "Here, in this building." "Doing what?" she managed to ask. "Serving you coffee. You can find someone far more qualified for that." "No," he said, a strange intensity in his eyes. "I want you to be let's call it a perspective advisor. Your job will be to observe, to listen in meetings, to read reports, and to tell me the truth, to tell me when my executives are lying to me, to tell me when an idea is terrible, to tell me when my steak is cooked perfectly and I'm just being an ass." The proposition was so absurd, so utterly insane, that Lara almost laughed. "You want to pay me to be your conscience? I don't have a conscience," he stated flatly. "I want to pay you for your eyes, for your lack of fear. I spend my life in an echo chamber. I want to hire the one person who is willing to break the glass." He named a salary. It was a staggering figure, nearly 3 times what she made at Aurelia, with full medical benefits for her and her family. All her problems, the debt, the bills, her parents' care would be solved. It was a trap. It had to be. This was just another more elaborate way to own her. A gilded cage where her only purpose was to be his pet truth-teller, to be paraded around as an example of his eccentric genius. "Why?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Why would you do this?" "Just because I didn't back down over a piece of meat." Alistair's expression shifted. The corporate mask fell away for a split second, revealing a glimpse of something raw and desolate beneath. "Because everyone in my life lies to me," he said, his voice dropping. "About everything. The small things, the big things. And I have learned through bitter experience that small lies are how catastrophic truths hide. I need someone who doesn't lie. Not to me. Not ever." He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict. "This is not a trick, Miss Vance. It is a business proposition. Your integrity is the asset I am hiring. The moment you lie to me, the moment you tell me what you think I want to hear, you are fired. Do you understand?" She thought about her life, the endless shifts, the smell of grease in her hair, the constant gnawing anxiety of the bills. She thought about her art, the canvases gathering dust in her apartment. This offer was a lifeline, but it was a lifeline thrown by a monster. Could she take it without becoming one herself? But then she remembered the look on her mother's face the last time a bill came. She remembered the quiet dignity she felt when she stood her ground in the restaurant. Maybe she didn't have to surrender her integrity to accept. Maybe this was a way to use it. "I have conditions," she said, surprising herself. Alistair raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "My parents' medical care, it's covered, in full, by your corporate plan, starting today." "Done," he said without hesitation. "I work 9 to 5, no weekends. My personal time is my own. Acceptable. And," she took a deep breath, "you will never ever speak to me or anyone else in my presence with the kind of disrespect you showed me at that restaurant. You want the truth from me, you will treat me with professional courtesy. The moment you don't, I walk. No matter the salary." Julian Croft, who had been standing silently in the corner, looked like he was about to faint. No one had ever given Alistair Blackwood conditions for anything. Alistair stared at her, a long, appraising look. She met his gaze without flinching. The office was so quiet, she could hear the hum of the building's ventilation system. He was deciding. He was weighing his pride against his strange, desperate need for an honest voice. Finally, he extended a hand. "You have a deal, Miss Vance." Lara took his hand. His grip was firm and cold. As they shook, she felt a profound sense of vertigo. She had just stepped out of her world and into his, and she had no idea if she would survive the fall. "Welcome to Blackwood Industries," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Your new life starts now." Ilara's first week at Blackwood Industries was a masterclass in surrealism. She was given a minimalist office, not far from Alistair's, with the same breathtaking view. A company credit card appeared on her desk. An IT technician set up a computer and phone system for her. No one, however, seemed to know what she was supposed to do. She was the ghost in the machine. When she walked into the executive kitchenette, conversations would cease. Vice presidents in their $1,000 suits would give her tight, wary smiles before finding a reason to be elsewhere. The story had circulated in whispers she was the waitress. No one knew the details, only that she had somehow caught the beast's eye and was now inexplicably here. They treated her like a bomb that could detonate at any moment. Alistair was true to his word. He summoned her to meetings. She would sit in a leather chair at the back of the boardroom, while he and his team dissected billion-dollar mergers, hostile takeovers, and market strategies. The language they spoke was alien, all acronyms and financial jargon. She didn't understand half of it, but she understood the people. She saw the fear. She saw the way a senior VP named Marcus Thorne would subtly rephrase his own failing projections to sound like minor setbacks. She saw how a young, ambitious executive named Chloe Bishop would present a brilliant idea only to retract it slightly when Alistair frowned. She saw the sycophancy he had described a poison that made everyone hedge their bets and soften their truths. After a particularly grueling meeting about a failing green energy subsidiary, Alistair dismissed everyone but her. "Well, Miss Vance," he asked, loosening his tie, "what did my yes-men fail to tell me today?" Lara took a moment to gather her thoughts. "They didn't fail to tell you anything, sir. They just told it to you in a different language. They told you the Solaris division is underperforming against aggressive Q3 targets. What they meant was that it's hemorrhaging money, and the technology is 3 years behind your main competitor, Thorn Global." Alistair nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "And Marcus Thorn. What of his report?" "He spent 10 minutes blaming European market instability," Lara said. "But when Ms. Bishop presented the initial viability report 2 years ago, I saw it in the prep files. She warned that the core technology wasn't scalable. Mr. Thorn was the one who pushed it through. He's not protecting the company. He's protecting his own reputation." Alistair didn't say anything. He just stared at the blank screen where the disastrous projections had been. He wasn't angry. He seemed weary. "Thank you, Miss Vance," he said quietly. "That will be all." The next day, Marcus Thorn was no longer the head of the Solaris division. He was reassigned to a desolate branch in Anchorage. A memo announced that Chloe Bishop would be taking his place, with a mandate to either fix the technology within 6 months or dissolve the subsidiary. The message was sent loud and clear throughout the company. The Waitress was listening, and the king was acting. The fear of her intensified, but it was now mingled with a grudging respect. Lara's life changed outside the office, too. The first direct deposit of her salary felt unreal. That weekend, she sat down with her parents and a financial advisor. She paid off every last cent of their medical debt. The look of profound, tearful relief on her mother's face was worth every terrifying second she had spent in Alistair Blackwood's presence. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. She bought a new set of professional clothes. She even bought a large canvas and a set of expensive oil paints she'd been dreaming of. Yet a deep unease remained. Who was Alistair Blackwood? She saw the ruthless CEO, the demanding boss. But there were glimpses of something else. One evening as she was leaving, she passed his office. The door was ajar. He was standing by the window, not looking at the city, but at a small silver frame in his hands. His shoulders, usually so straight and commanding, were slumped. The loneliness emanating from him was so profound, it was almost a physical force. She backed away silently, feeling like she had intruded on a private grief. Her curiosity got the better of her. She started to dig subtly. She used her access to the company's digital archives, ostensibly for research. She looked up Alistair's official corporate biography. It was standard fare. Wharton graduate, inherited a modest manufacturing company from his father, and through sheer genius and aggression, built it into a global conglomerate. It mentioned his current marital status as widower. No other details. Then she found a stray news clipping from a local Pennsylvania paper dated 12 years ago. The headline was stark: "Local industrialist's family killed in tragic accident." The story was short, but devastating. Alistair Blackwood, then a rising star, had been driving with his wife Amelia and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. A drunk driver had run a red light, T-boning their car. The article stated that Alistair had sustained serious injuries, but his wife and daughter had been killed instantly. The last line of the report was a quote from a police officer. Mr. Blackwood was adamant the accident was his fault, that he should have reacted faster. He is inconsolable. Suddenly everything clicked into place. The rage, the control, the isolation. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man, trapped in a prison of his own grief and guilt. He controlled his company with an iron fist, because he had lost control of the one thing that mattered with catastrophic results, the steak. What if it was something as simple and as heartbreaking as a memory? What if his wife used to order her steak that way? His outburst wasn't about the food. It was about the sudden unwelcome intrusion of a memory he had tried to bury. That evening, Lara didn't go straight home. She went to the New York Public Library and looked through newspaper archives. She found a society photo from a charity gala, taken a year before the accident. It showed a younger Alistair smiling. It was a genuine, unguarded smile, one she had never seen. His arm was around a beautiful woman with warm, kind eyes, Amelia, and holding his other hand was a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, Lily. They looked happy. They looked whole. Staring at the grainy photograph, Lara felt a pang of profound empathy. She wasn't working for a monster. She was working for a ghost, a man haunted by the family he couldn't save. And her job, she realized with a jolt, was far more complicated than just telling the truth about business reports. The knowledge of Alistair's past changed everything for Lara. She no longer saw a tyrant when he strode into a room. She saw a man carrying an unbearable weight. His legendary temper no longer seemed like random cruelty, but like the lashing out of a caged, wounded animal. Her fear of him evaporated, replaced by a complex, cautious empathy. This new perspective altered their dynamic. She started anticipating his moods not to placate him, but to understand his triggers. She began leaving small anonymous things in his office she thought might help. A cup of a specific chamomile tea, known for its calming properties, would be on his desk after a stressful call. When she overheard him telling Julian his eyes were strained from reading reports, a state-of-the-art blue light filtering screen protector was installed on his monitor the next morning. She never took credit. They were just there. Alistair never mentioned the items, but he used them. And a subtle shift occurred. The tension in his shoulders would ease slightly when she entered a room. He started asking for her opinion on things outside of business, the aesthetics of a new product design, the wording of a press release. He was testing the waters, extending a tentative trust she wasn't sure he had offered anyone in a decade. The true test came during what became known internally as the Thorne Global Crisis. Marcus Thorne, the disgraced former executive, had not gone quietly to Anchorage. He had been poached by their chief rival, Thorne Global, no relation, a bitter irony. He took with him intimate knowledge of Blackwood Industries' weaknesses, specifically the struggling Solaris division. Thorne Global launched an aggressive public campaign to acquire Solaris, framing it as a rescue mission for a floundering company. They leaked documents, fed negative stories to the press, and drove Blackwood Industries' stock price down. Alistair was fighting a war on two fronts, one in the market, and one with his own board, who were getting nervous and pushing him to sell the division and cut their losses. The pressure mounted, and the old Alistair Blackwood began to resurface. He became volatile, short-tempered, and paranoid. One afternoon, during a frantic emergency board meeting, a junior analyst fumbled his presentation, mixing up two crucial slides. Alistair exploded. "Are you an idiot?" he roared, slamming his hand on the table so hard the water glasses jumped. The entire room flinched. The young analyst turned ghost-white, stammering apologies. "I pay you 7 figures to get details right, and you bring this garbage to me. Get out, you're fired." The familiar, chilling silence descended. The board members stared at their notes, avoiding eye contact. In the past, this would have been the end of it. But Lara was there. She stood up from her seat at the back of the room. Every head swiveled towards her. Alistair's eyes, blazing with fury, locked onto hers. "Sir," She said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension. "May I have a word?" "This is not the time, Miss Vance," he bit out. "It is precisely the time," she insisted, walking slowly towards the head of the table. She didn't look at the board members or the terrified analyst. She looked only at Alistair. "You are making decisions based on anger and pressure. You are letting Thorn get into your head. Firing a good analyst for a minor mistake doesn't hurt Thorn. It hurts us. It makes everyone else in this room afraid to take risks, afraid to bring you anything but good news. It creates the very echo chamber you hired me to prevent." She reached the table and picked up the analyst's report. "His data is sound. His conclusion is correct. He just switched slides, 14 and 15. It's a mistake anyone could make under this much pressure." She looked at the young man. "Isn't that right, Mr. Davies?" The analyst, finding his voice, nodded numbly. "Yes, miss." Lara turned back to Alistair. The fury in his eyes was now warring with disbelief. She was doing it again, challenging him in front of everyone. But this time it felt different. It wasn't defiance. It was an intervention. "Let him finish his presentation," she said softly. "Listen to the data. Then we can make a decision as a team, not as a king and his terrified subjects." The boardroom was utterly still. Alistair stared at her, his jaw tight. For a moment, she thought she had pushed him too far, that he would fire her along with the analyst. But then she saw the flicker of pain behind the rage, the look of a man lost in a storm. He was drowning, and she had just thrown him a line. He took a long, slow breath, the air shuddering out of him. He sank back into his chair, the rigid anger draining from his posture. He looked at the trembling analyst. "Continue, Mr. Davies." Alistair said, his voice hoarse. "From slide 14. The collective exhale in the room was almost silent, but deafening. The meeting continued on a completely different footing. The board members, emboldened, began to offer real strategies. Chloe Bishop presented a daring counter-proposal. The analyst, Davies, finished his report, which contained a crucial piece of data they had been missing. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan, a risky, brilliant plan to fight back against Thorn Global. That evening, Lara was working late in her office when Alistair appeared at her door. He didn't speak, just stood there, looking tired and older than she had ever seen him. "Walk with me," he said finally. They took his private elevator down to the garage and got into his car, a sleek, understated Audi, not the ostentatious Rolls-Royce she expected. He drove. They left the city behind, heading north along the Hudson River as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. They didn't talk for a long time. Finally, he pulled over at a scenic overlook, the river, a ribbon of silver below. "No one has spoken to me like that since she died," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. He didn't have to say who she was. "She was never afraid of me." He continued, staring out at the water. "Amelia. She said my temper was just a loud noise from a scared boy. She could see right through it. Right through me." He finally turned to look at Lara, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "The accident. The police report said it was a drunk driver. That's the public story. The truth is we were arguing about something stupid, a business deal. I was angry. I was distracted. I looked away from the road for 2 seconds, maybe 1. When I looked back, the headlights were there. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. So, yes, a drunk driver ran the light. But if I hadn't been angry, if I had been paying attention, I would have seen him. I could have swerved. I could have done something. His voice broke. The last thing my wife and daughter ever heard was my voice raised in anger. That is the truth I live with. The confession hung in the quiet car, raw and devastating. Lara's heart ached for him. This was the source of it all, the wound that had never healed. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. She simply sat there with him in the twilight, a silent witness to his pain. After a few minutes, she reached over and hesitantly placed her hand on his forearm. It was a simple, human gesture of comfort. He didn't pull away. He simply closed his eyes, and for the first time in 12 years, the great Alistair Blackwood allowed someone else to share the crushing weight of his sorrow. The confession in the car was a turning point. The professional boundary between Alistair and Lara blurred, replaced by a fragile, unspoken alliance. He was still her boss, the formidable billionaire, but now she was also his confidant, the keeper of his most painful secret. In turn, he became her mentor, explaining the intricacies of his business, valuing her intuitive reads on people as much as his analysts' data-driven reports. They became a formidable team, armed with Chloe Bishop's revitalized strategy and Lara's uncanny ability to pinpoint deception. They took the fight to Thorn Global. Lara sat in on negotiation sessions, not saying a word, simply watching. Afterward, she would tell Alistair, their lead negotiator Peterson, he keeps touching his ear when he talks about their Q4 financing. He's bluffing. They don't have the capital they claim. Acting on her instincts, Alistair would call their bluff applying pressure where they were weakest. Bit by bit, they began to turn the tide. The stock price stabilized. The board's confidence returned. The story on Wall Street shifted from Blackwood's decline to his cunning resurgence. Alistair began to change. The flashes of temper grew less frequent. He started to listen more in meetings. He even on one occasion cracked a dry, witty joke that stunned the entire boardroom into silence before they realized they were allowed to laugh. He was still formidable, still demanding, but the cruel, brittle edge was softening. He was starting to resemble the smiling man in the old photograph. Their relationship deepened in the quiet moments. They often worked late, sharing a simple dinner of takeout in his office as they mapped out their next move. He would ask her about her art, and his eyes would light up with genuine interest as she described her passion for capturing fleeting moments of city life on canvas. She learned he had a love for classical music and a surprising knowledge of ancient history. They were two lonely people from different universes who had found a strange common ground. But as they grew closer to victory, their enemy grew more desperate. Marcus Thorne and his allies at Thorn Global knew they were losing the conventional war. So they decided to make it personal. They started digging into Lara. One evening, Alistair received an anonymous encrypted email. It contained a single file. He opened it to find a meticulously crafted dossier on Lara Vance. It had everything: her parents' medical history, the exact amount of their debt, her struggles to pay bills, her job at Aurelia. But it was all twisted, spun into a poisonous narrative. The dossier painted Lara as a cunning, manipulative grifter. It suggested the confrontation at the restaurant was staged, a calculated move to get his attention. It framed her refusal of the $250,000 as a high-stakes gamble for a much bigger prize, a permanent place in the billionaire's inner circle. The final pages were filled with photos of them, working late, taken with a long lens camera from a building across the street, implying a scandalous, inappropriate relationship. The final sentence was a chilling threat. The world loves a story about a gold digger and a grieving fool. Celas Solaris, or this story goes to every major news outlet in the country. Alistair felt a cold, familiar rage build inside him, But this time it was different. It wasn't the out-of-control, guilt-ridden anger of his past. It was a focused, protective fury. They were trying to destroy the one person who had helped him climb out of his personal hell. They were trying to tarnish the one, pure, honest thing in his life. He immediately called Lara to his office. He didn't hide anything. He simply turned the monitor toward her and let her read. She scrolled through the file, her face growing paler with each line. The clinical, cruel way her family's pain had been weaponized, the way her integrity had been twisted into a sordid plot, it was vile. It made her feel exposed, violated. How could they get all this? She whispered, her voice trembling. My parents' medical records. That's illegal. They are ruthless, Alistair said, his voice grim. But they are not omniscient. To get information, this specific, they had to have help, from inside. The realization hit them both at the same time. The dossier contained details only a handful of people within Blackwood Industries could know, specifically the details of her employment contract and the exact benefits package that covered her parents. Julian knew. The head of HR knew. And a few others. Alistair immediately summoned Julian and his head of security. They worked through the night, cross-referencing access logs, email records, and security footage. The search was methodical, relentless. Lara sat on the couch in his office, wrapped in a blanket, feeling a sickening sense of dread. Someone she worked with, someone who smiled at her in the hallways, had betrayed her. By 4 a.m. they had their answer. It wasn't a VP or a rival executive. It was someone far more innocuous, someone they never would have suspected. It was Mr. Davies. The young analyst Lara had saved from being fired. The security logs showed he had accessed Lara's HR file multiple times over the past month from his home computer. Financial records illegally obtained by Alistair's security chief showed a series of large, untraceable crypto deposits into Davies's account, originating from a shell corporation linked to Thorn Global. The motive was simple and sordid. Davies had a gambling problem and was deep in debt. Marcus Thorn had found his weakness and exploited it. He had paid the young man to be their viper in the nest. Lara felt a wave of nausea. She had saved him. She had stood up for him, argued for his career. And he had repaid her by selling her out to her enemies, turning her life into ammunition for a corporate war. The betrayal was so much more painful than the anonymous threats of Marcus Thorn. Alistair saw the look on her face. He dismissed Julian and the security chief, leaving the two of them alone as the first hints of dawn touched the New York skyline. I am sorry, Lara, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I brought you into this world. I put this target on your back. She shook her head, pulling the blanket tighter. It's not your fault. It's theirs. What do we do now? He looked from the vile dossier on his screen to Lara's stricken face. The choice was clear. Give in to the blackmail and sell the division, protecting her from public ruin, or fight back and risk having her reputation, and by extension, his, dragged through the mud. The Alistair of 6 months ago would have cut his losses. He would have paid the price, silenced the problem, and retreated back into his fortress of solitude. But looking at Lara, at the brave, honest woman who had shown him how to feel again, he knew that was no longer an option. They had attacked her to get to him. It was a fatal miscalculation. They hadn't realized that by attacking Lara Vance, they were no longer just threatening his company. They were threatening the last best part of his life. We do what we've been doing for the last 2 months, he said, a dangerous calm settling over him. We fight back, but this time we don't play by their rules. This time we burn them to the ground. Alistair didn't flinch. he attacked. Before Thorn Global's deadline passed, he unleashed a legal firestorm. The press wasn't fed a story about a gold-digging waitress. They were given irrefutable proof of Thorn's criminal corporate espionage, complete with a signed confession from the compromised analyst, Mr. Davies. The narrative was flipped instantly. Thorn was the villain, not Lara. The move enraged Alistair's board. In an emergency meeting, they demanded he cut Lara loose, calling her a liability. Alistair faced them, his voice pure steel. Miss Vance is this company's single greatest asset. She is the reason we are winning this war. She is not going anywhere. If any of you disagree, your resignations will be accepted by sundown. The coup collapsed under his unshakable resolve. The final blow came from Lara herself. Using her artist's eye, she analyzed Thorn's product designs and discovered they were a direct copy of a stolen blueprint from their own Solaris division. This undeniable proof of intellectual property theft was the kill shot. Thorn Global was annihilated, its assets, later acquired by Blackwood, for pennies on the dollar. It was a total victory. Weeks later, Lara stood in his office. "This isn't my world, Alistair. It's time for me to be an artist." He understood. On her last day, he gifted her a fully paid 5-year lease on an art studio in Soho. "An investment," he said, smiling, "in an artist I believe in." Theirs was not a romance, but something deeper, a partnership forged in fire that had saved them both. He promised to never again complain about a steak, and she promised to have dinner with him, their friendship, the true, lasting victory. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It was a story about the incredible power of courage and empathy. It shows that sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who dares to speak the quiet truth. Lara Vance didn't just stand up to a fearsome man. She saw the broken person behind the rage, and without even trying, showed him a path back to himself. And Alistair Blackwood learned that true strength isn't about being feared. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable to trust and to change. Their story reminds us that beneath the titles and the bank accounts, we are all just human searching for connection and a second chance. If this story moved you or made you think, please let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who loves a powerful story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that touch the heart. Thank you for listening.